Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode of KSP Wayfinders. Previously we ended up launching a space station towards Gale's first moon, Iota. This is the Galileo's planet pack, in case you're wondering. Now we're actually going to be sending a crew to that space station, because it's completely useless without a crew. I will be using the Kane Block 3, I believe, space capsule from Blue Dog Design Bureau. It's basically inspired by the Apollo Block 3 capsule, which can hold 5 Kerbals, although it is a little bit cramped and it's meant to be used with an additional habitation module, but unfortunately my space station's budget doesn't necessarily meet the requirements to install that. So I guess these Kerbals are going to have to buckle up for a rather long road trip to the station. And I am using a rather rescaled solar system, so it's 2.5 times scale, so it will take a good while longer to actually get there. Sorry guys, it's gonna be crammed in there for a few days. Hopefully when they get to the station they can actually stretch their legs a bit. Now, I don't really have big plans for this Iota station. It's just gonna be there to farm some extra science. I won't be doing anything like a gateway station with Iota, but I will be doing that with Gale's second moon, Ceti. In fact, actually later in this episode I'll be doing that. But I'm not going to spoil the entire episode. Getting an encounter with Iota is a little tricky because we are in a very different inclination, because the Gale Space Center is actually not on the equator directly, so you will end up going a bunch of wonky orbits whenever you launch it. However, it does add a bit of a challenge, and still, getting an encounter is not that hard. You just gotta do a somewhat inexpensive mid-course correction. I kind of goofed up my maneuver here. I kept trying to do it blind, but I eventually managed to get it. Once again, I am using the hydrazine and liquid oxygen thrusters from Alcoholic Aeronautics. It has a bunch of ethanol-powered rockets, but with chemical technologies installed, they can actually use a bunch of other fuels, like hypergolics. While they can still use liquid oxygen, I could be using nitrogen tetroxide by now. I think I have unlocked it, but I feel like oxygen is actually slightly more efficient in terms of ISP, but it does offer a little bit less thrust, so in Kerbal Space Program, you often do end up sacrificing thrust for ISP a whole lot, so I feel like this is the right choice. Besides, I do like the rather odd fuel mixture that most engines don't have. Fortunately, I fat finger the time warp, so I end up warping right past my maneuver to rendezvous with the Iota station. Thankfully, I can just do another orbit and actually recorrect my trajectory. For some weird reason, this command capsule doesn't actually have crew control. It actually requires a probe core for a whole lot of stuff. So if I don't have a direct line of communications with the Kerbal Space Center, I actually cannot control this vessel that well. I mean, I do have partial control, but I can't just do partial throttle or a whole lot of maneuvering. Thankfully, we do have plenty of reception when we actually end up docking with it, so it's very easy. I did make sure to put an abundance of RCS thrusters on this, just to make docking as easy as it possibly can. Now this station actually does have a lot of fuel in its hydrogen transfer tank, so I could move this around if I wanted to, especially if I wanted to get some science from in space high and space low. I'm currently in space low right now, so if I do end up getting some more science, which I will eventually later this episode, I will change the orbit of this space station just so it's a little bit higher. Because of the way Kerbal Space Program science works is that once you're in orbit of a vacuum body, or any body in general, there's in space low and in space high, which basically if you're in a high orbit you get different science than you would in its space low. So if you really want to make the most out of science and getting a bunch of science out of a planet or moon, you should make sure to do a flyby very, very close to it. Now, I launched this probe last episode, but my footage corrupted. This is the Adventurer II probe. It's going to Gratian and its moon Geminus. Now, those who are familiar with the Galileo's planet pack may notice that Gratian is blue for some reason. It may not seem bad, but I think Gratian's actually supposed to be more of like an orangish-red like Duna. I have no idea why it's blue. It must be a bunch of the mods I have that actually give Galileo's planet pack updated graphics. That probably is the reason, but I suppose it's nice having it be blue instead of just being too similar to Dunga. Now, I'm really proud of the flyby I had, because it actually slings me past Gratian's moon Geminus, which I believe has some cracks of lava on it, if I recall correctly. It's a very interesting moon, and since I'll be flying by it, and Gratian itself, I will be getting a whole lot of science from this one mission. We are at the very edge of our communications range, though, so I am glad I packed all of this antenna. Now here we are with our Geminus flyby. It's a very interesting moon with a lot of cracks of lava on it. I really would like to do a landing on this eventually. In fact, I do want to land on literally every moon and planet in Galileo's planet pack before I let this series end. Now, also, Wayfinder II actually does have enough fuel to capture into an orbit. Now, I really regret not making this a landing mission, because I could have gotten a whole lot more science just by doing a landing. I had the fuel, but I didn't think I had enough back when I was actually designing this mission. Because most of the other missions I end up underbuilding when I want to do a landing, and end up having not enough fuel to perform a landing. But most of those missions are going towards the inner solar systems, where Delta V requirements are extremely high. Now I'm going to the science tree to buy some more science, and just look at the tree just so I can make some plans. Now, unfortunately, the Iota station doesn't actually have enough batteries to do research correctly. It often ends up running out on the dark side, especially when I'm trying to transmit science, which is not ideal when Iota ends up blocking your view when you're actually in sunlight. It's not often like this, because Iota, when it orbits a different way, can actually get sunlight and the communication, but just the way it was positioned currently kind of made it a little bit inconvenient. But this won't jeopardize any of my missions. I don't have any life support mods that would require a constant stream of electric charge, so it's not the end of the world. Should probably talk about plans for my first interplanetary crew mission. I will be using a plasma-powered vehicle for that. It'll be a while before I'll actually unlock the tech required to make such a large interplanetary vehicle. I do plan for it to be used multiple times, so I will overbuild it for this very first mission, just so I can push it as far as possible in future missions. Now, I'm also going to do a little bit of an orbit change with Iota Station, because previously I said I wanted some science in space high around Iota. Space high around Iota, I kind of fumbled that. Just the way Kerbal Space Program science works, it's best to have science equipment be used in both altitudes. Now here's a little brief station tour. It's nothing really much, just a couple of pods. You know, that was kind of a scuffed station tour. And I'm going to maximize the amount of science I get just by performing some time warp. But I do have a mod that actually returns the science and transmits them automatically, so it's a very convenient mod to have. It's called a Lab Housekeeper. I do believe it's in my mod list. I highly recommend it for any science playthrough or any career playthrough. Now, we did actually get some electrothermal engines with a lot higher ISP and therefore Delta V margins. So this is Wayfinder I, launched on top of the Gratian I rocket. My whole naming convention with all my launch vehicles is I want them to be named after the planetary bodies in Galileo's planet pack, kind of like how the Saturn V is named after Saturn as a planet. Not all of my rockets will follow this naming scheme, but I do want most of them to follow it. I'm also trying to use MechJeb more, especially with Smart ASS, which is a much better smart stability assist, which actually makes sure your craft stays pointing the way you want it to. Where with a stock SAS tool, you end up oscillating a whole bunch, and it's just nasty. Now, this is using a fancy electrothermal rocket that runs on hydrazine. I believe it's an ArcJet. The ArcJet engine is actually somewhat efficient, with similar ISP to a nuclear thermal rocket. But it only has a limited use time, because if you use it for too long, the electronics inside get fried or something. That electronics being fried is simulated by using a blader as a resource that cannot be replaced. Thankfully, the amount of a blader I do have actually allows me to use the most of all of my fuel. So I can actually make this transfer to Icarus, which is the closest planet to the Zero star system. Zero is the replacement for Kerbal in Galileo's planet pack. And just like Moho, getting to the innermost planet is very difficult because you need to slow down a whole lot to actually end up going to where you want to go. And if you want to get into an orbit, you have to slow down even more. Now, I was not able to get into an orbit, but that was not the mission's plan. I just wanted to do a flyby, because getting to an orbit wouldn't really give me much more science than just doing a flyby close to Icarus. Now, the first part of the burn is done with these Hydrolox rockets, but then the rest of the burn will be done in interplanetary space to actually put this craft on a trajectory towards Icarus. Because for some reason, if I recall correctly, the MechJeb maneuver planner was giving me bad numbers and just wouldn't work for some reason. There's a weird glitch with MechJeb where sometimes it just gives me like a NAN value for like delta V usage and just won't give me a good maneuver. I have no idea why this happens, but if you have an idea of a possible fix, please let me know in the comments. It's just really annoying. But thankfully, when MechJeb's maneuver planner does actually work, it works miracles. It's really great for plotting maneuvers as efficiently as possible. However, in this case, MechJeb was really bugging me. I just couldn't get it to work in this exact scenario, so I just did the old-fashioned way in the end and just did it manually. Without MechJeb, I usually just go interplanetary right away and figure it out from there, because I find it much easier to plot an encounter with another body while I'm actually in interplanetary space, because I'm not really good with transfer windows. I mean, everyone knows you need to be, for example, the stock system, everybody knows doing it has to be like 45 degrees ahead or behind curbing. I can't really remember. That's what everyone says, but I don't listen to that. I just burn, make a maneuver, and if it doesn't work, I wait in orbit. It does work, but the Kerbals do end up spending a lot of time orbiting the star for a rather long amount of time, which isn't the most efficient way to run a space program, but as long as I get to the destination in the end, it's completely fine. Now, this ArcJet engine is very special because it's running on hydrazine. It is compatible with chemical technologies. If you're not using it, it'll just use monopropellant, because that's kind of what hydrazine is equivalent to in the stock game. I can't use maximum physics warp because my craft will start oscillating. Usually, Smart ASS prevents this, but at higher physics warps, it can be an issue. Now, I could use Persistent Thrust, which is a really great mod for if you have really bad TWR, but in my experience, it's extremely glitchy. In fact, the whole reason I never installed it in the first place, or until later in this series, is that I originally wanted this to be a career playthrough, but the 2.5 rescale and career theme just didn't work out. You also notice I kind of got bored during the maneuver, so I started flashing through the entire solar system. But with Persistent Thrust, it's a weird glitch where, for some reason, specifically in career mode, if you actually try using a non-throttleable engine like a solid rocket motor, for some reason it just has no thrust. It provides no thrust whatsoever. This is really odd because this only happens in career mode, of all things. I have no idea what's causing it, so I decided to go without Persistent Thrust, but then I eventually decided to give up on career mode with 2.5 times rescale, because having to manage your money and do contracts with much higher Delta V budgets is pretty difficult, so I just decided to do a plain old regular science mode playthrough. Now, just for out of curiosity, I tried to make a maneuver to capture into an orbit around Icarus, but that would cost me like 15,000 meters per second of Delta V, or something crazy like that. I never intended to do an orbit, I just wanted to do a flyby. The other thing I should mention about the electrothermal rocket is that it actually does need radiators. Not many, but it is system heat compatible. Now, this flyby is actually happens very, very fast. I mean, extremely fast. We're going at thousands and thousands of meters per second, and since this is a smaller body, it does go by extremely fast. Now, this is edited to be 3 times faster, but imagine this is going like a little bit slower. I'm not using any physics warp. Just look how fast it's going. Just goes to show, if I actually wanted to do a capture burn, I probably would have had to have a pretty decent TWR, because I won't have been very close to periapsis for very long. I mean, the speed was kind of exaggerated. I did speed this up 3 times. But it's still extremely fast, especially in real time. Now, with all the science I actually got from that mission, I can go in the research and development building and pick up a few science nodes. Specifically like universal docking, because I still am using androgynous docking ports until now, because I finally got that tech node that actually unlocks the stock docking ports. I also decided to look at some more rocket engines, very tempting, but I feel like advanced cockpits is the way to go. Now, the Iowa station has run its course. It's completely done. I feel like I've gotten as much science as I want to from this mission. So now it's time to bring the crew home. Doing this is pretty easy. I just gotta plot out a maneuver that takes me directly into Gale's atmosphere, and then just let the heat shield and atmospheric drag do the rest. Now, for whatever reason, this ended up putting a massive amount of stress on the heat shield, and it ended up blowing me up the first time I did it. Thankfully, I had a quick save, and I could just do it again. But usually with these missions, even at 2.5 times rescale, the heat shield does in fact work. It might be something weird that collisions or maybe Blue Dog Design Bureau isn't balanced for 2.5 times rescale in terms of heat shields. I'm not sure. For some reason the cockpit started heating up also. But this quick save I actually used the engines to slow down a little bit. And thankfully we were able to re-enter the atmosphere safely, though the temperature bar got dangerously close to destroying my vessel, and a couple of the Kerbals passed out too. Which isn't exactly an optimal re-entry, but any landing you can walk away from is a good landing. Now as the sun sets, the crew descends and lands in the ocean, marking the end of a successful mission. At this point, I'm going to be launching Wayfinder II, which will go to Thalia and Ega. Thalia is the second closest planet to Zero, and it also has a moon, that being Ega. This is almost identical to Wayfinder I, because it's powered by the same electrothermal rocket. I do believe I made a couple of alterations to it, but it's practically the same. Now, the main drawback with the Gratian 1 launch vehicle is that the upper stage has very low TWR, because these are Hydrolox engines, although they are very efficient and the upper stage has a lot of delta V, it just doesn't offer enough thrust, so I do have to end up pointing upward a whole lot to actually return to enter orbit and not fall back down back to the ground. As I do end up burning some fuel, the TWR slightly improves, but it's still very, very low. In fact, I think it might be more efficient just to pack more engines or less fuel tanks on here just to get higher TWR to actually reach orbit in an efficient way. Later iterations of this vehicle will actually use better engines that are the same size, but I don't think that will appear until a future episode. The whole thing with how I make these YouTube videos is that I always record a whole lot of footage, but then I don't edit that footage and upload it until a whole lot later. So I can end up recording some footage from all the way back in March. This entire video was recorded in March, so that was a long time ago actually. It's almost May by the time I'm making this voiceover. In fact, I believe it will be May by the time I actually upload this video. Sometimes when making these voiceovers, you gotta think ahead and when you're actually going to upload the video. Thankfully, I don't have to look ahead too much because these voiceovers are actually made very close to when I actually upload the video. For a little bit, I was actually worried about the future of Kerbal Space Program because of numerous factors. I just felt like a whole lot of the community was just leaving, especially after the death of Kerbal Space Program 2. But especially after Artemis 2, I feel like the opposite is true. Kerbal Space Program, I believe, is more alive than it ever has been because since Artemis 2, the Steam concurrent player count actually reached an all-time high. That player count record, I believe, was unbroken, like, since 2015, so this is absolutely huge. And I feel like with an influx of new players, and especially the return of a few older YouTubers, I feel like Kerbal Space Program is seeing a whole lot of a massive resurgence. Speaking of resurgence, My other YouTube series, KSP Resurgence, I plan to end it quite soon, and I do plan to have a cinematic finale come out for it. Now that will not be the end of the save file, it will just be the end of the series. I'll continue it in a future series, and I will be exploring the new updated Cosmic Serenity, which the update is planned to come out in May, so I'm really excited about that update. Should probably get back to what's actually happening on the video. I am actually getting a really close encounter with Ega, Thalia. Ega's the moon of Thalia. Now, this lander, the actual spacecraft, is very similar to a Wayfinder I, but I actually added a lander to the top of it. I'll be using some, I do believe using some solid plasma propulsion engines to perform the landing. Just because the engines are very compact and they're very efficient, I get a whole lot of delta V. But unfortunately, I don't think this landing actually worked out, just because the delta V requirements were off the charts. So I can't actually get into an orbit, let alone a landing. So this mission is somewhat of a failure, but thankfully I can repurpose it to actually be a Thalia-Ega combination flyby, similar to Adventurer II. Wayfinder I went to Icarus only. I was really looking forward to using this lander, just because I felt like the design with the plasma propulsion engines for landing was really unique and would have got me a whole lot of efficiency. The thing with those solid plasma engines is that they actually use solid fuel and cannot be refueled, but all the fuel is self-contained, so they're very compact and highly efficient, despite using solid fuel. Now there's a weird glitch whenever I go to Thalia. I mentioned this in previous episodes, I actually end up overheating for some reason. Now we may think this is just because of how close to zero I am, but I went to Icarus, which is way closer, and I do not see this issue. Like, the closer I get to Thalia, the hotter I get. I'm not sure if this is an intended feature or a bug, but I'm just going to enable ignore max temperature because this is just ridiculous. Thankfully, I did not encounter this issue. I just flew by Ega, which seems to be devoid of this weird issue. Now, unfortunately, I did have to cram my experiments somewhere deep in the probe core, so I do have to end up no-clipping my camera in here. Now, I don't know what happened, but I think because I'm using slow-mo physics warp to make sure I control the science experiments, I feel like they didn't transmit correctly. Thankfully, I did end up loading a quick save and I rectified this issue. It's just a weird glitch I encountered, where all my science won't transmit correctly for some reason. Despite that minor setback, I just loaded a quick save and did the science again, so I did end up making a huge scientific profit from this mission. Now, I'm buying parts that will actually prepare me for surface base, because this gateway station that I'm launching right now on the supermassive Blizzard 7 rocket will actually be a gateway station, because it'll have a lander, similar to NASA's scrapped Lunar Gateway, which they were actually going to be using to host Artemis missions to the moon. But I heard they scrapped that in favor of doing some nuclear plasma propulsion to Mars or something. Now, this space station will be the host of a laboratory, and also will have a lander attached to it for a whole bunch of missions. And I'll also attach a fuel tank to it later, so the lander can be refueled. And all this will be useless if they're wearing a surface base. That's my entire plan for this mission. A lander, a space station, and a surface base. So the space station itself will hold scientific equipment and habitation space, while the lander will act as a ferry that will transport crew members between the station and the surface base. The surface base will also have laboratories of its own, just to maximize the scientific output for this entire mission. Going to Ceti is pretty easy, though I do end up coming on a weird trajectory, just because Ceti is on a very elliptical... Well, it's not an elliptical orbit, it's not an inclined orbit. Elliptical means it's an ellipsis and not circular orbit. Now, the whole goal of this orbital gateway is to maximize the amount of science I'm getting, and also give the Kerbals a little chance to prepare for going interplanetary. Now, along with this, I also plan to do a scientific rover, because my first interplanetary mission will actually be an extended duration, so I'll actually be sending a rover to explore Niven, which is the first interplanetary planet I plan to visit. Now, I actually want to test that rover, and I do end up just winging it for the science. The rover I'll also be using on Ceti to give it a test run and just grab some more science, and actually be able to explore biomes. Now, for the rover, I will be using the Bon Voyage mod, which allows you to automatically drive rovers in time warp. All you gotta do is select a location and just go to the tracking station or a different sphere of influence and just time warp until you get there. It's an incredibly convenient mod. Now, unfortunately, this space station and future surface base is completely useless without a crew, so that's why I'm launching the crew on a modified rocket. This is the Blizzard 7S. The S stands for Slim. It's a slightly slimmer version, but most of the engine layout's the same. I did try doing this with a slimmer rocket with a diameter of 5 meters, but it wouldn't work out. You also notice that the entire rocket, well, almost the entire rocket, is constructed out of procedural parts, which basically allows me to do all these cool paint jobs. I do like the way it came out, though I don't like how some of the parts, like, I can't really use engine mounts, I have to make my own. It doesn't look as good as the ones from, say, near-future launch vehicles. I do still love this launch vehicle, and it's an incredibly capable one, too. Capable of launching this entire vehicle to Ceti and beyond. I could extend the mission duration and range of this spacecraft by giving it a little bit extra fuel, but I don't really need to. I don't need to add fuel, it's already a little bit overbuilt as it is. It's a very flexible vehicle. I'm sure I'll be able to ferry crew to Ceti and back incredibly well. Now, unfortunately, the upper stage is running out of fuel, so we will have to finish this burn using the onboard OMS. Thankfully, I did pack a whole lot of fuel in this, so it will be able to carry out the burn to Ceti. I just used Mech Jeb to help me plot a maneuver because I was too lazy to do it myself. A minor mid-course correction burn is required to actually end up going on a perfect trajectory. You always end up doing a mid-course correction burn when trying to get somewhere, because the stock maneuver tool, sometimes it doesn't give you the maneuver you want, and sometimes you can't actually accurately plot out maneuver with it. Thankfully, mid-course correction burns are always cheap. At this point, all that's left for there to do is to actually rendezvous and dock with the station, which is somewhat easy. Now, to dock with a vessel in Kerbal Space Program, all you gotta do is set as your target, and make sure your ascending node and descending node is as close to 0 as possible. To actually change the descending node, you actually have to create a burn and use the normal and anti-normal things, like the purple triangles on the maneuver tool, to actually get it to as close to 0 as possible. Once you do that, you just gotta fiddle with the maneuver tool until you get a close encounter. Now, once you actually get there, you actually have to point retrograde relative to your target. You can get your target relative velocity by clicking the orbit on your nav ball and click it until it says target, and then aim retrograde. By doing this, you'll actually slow yourself down relative to the space station, so you'll end up going at the same speed it is. Now, from there, docking's easy. If you don't want to manually line up your craft with RCS like what I'm doing here, all you gotta do is use the Matlown lazy docking method. To use it, basically switch to your space station and select your spacecraft as a target. Then make sure you're controlling from the docking port by right-clicking control from here and point towards target. Then you go back to your spacecraft and point towards that docking port by pointing it towards target. And then all you gotta do is just burn forward and make sure you're not drifting away somewhere else. And that's easy. That's how convenient the Matlown lazy docking method is. Now, with the station in orbit, all that's left for there to do is send a surface base down to Ceti. But unfortunately, that will be the end of this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and I'll see you all in the next one.